You tell how many people are remotely?
2 people online.
Oh, okay. It's an intimate crowd, online and here. I think given that a small group like this, I think we can run this a little bit more casually than we might with a large group. So I have a habit when I get going to just get going. I'll take some breaths. I'll pause. If you have questions or if something pops up right away that you want to ask about, feel free. I might say, oh, that's a better. Let me get to that at the end, or that's coming up. But I think we can make this a little different than a normal fly through the slides presentation. Yeah. All right. Oh, you want me to go back? Oh, are we starting?
Oh, yes.
Oh, sorry. So sorry. Okay, no, go back. So sorry. No, I thought I was waiting for a go. This is all right. Well, so I want to introduce myself first. I'm Dr. Jeff Eble with Florida Institute of Technology, and I'm really happy to have a chance to share some of our work, some of our recent progress on what we consider to be a really interesting project. Before I get into the details of the project, I really want to thank, there's a number of folks that are involved in this project. This is a multidisciplinary project. We have geochemists, we have modelers, we have people from state agencies giving advice on the project and helping guide it, federal agencies as well. We're partnering with Tetra Tech to do some of this work. All of these folks have come together over the last 2 years to help us better understand whether enhanced ocean exchange could provide meaningful contributions or meaningful improvements to water quality without a whole cascade of potential negative impacts. Because that's really important for us. And I'll emphasize that right from the beginning, is that we're considering these new approaches in order to address a declining water quality, very, very poor water quality in the lagoon, but we don't want to create a whole bunch of other problems just to address water quality. We need to understand how the system as a whole is going to respond to this potential intervention. And so with that, I wanted to thank our partners. I also wanted to thank Representative Debbie Mayfield and Representative Thad Altman, who have provided support for this project, and they've been boosting us up on at the state level, and they were able to arrange help us get 2 appropriations to fund year 1 and year 2, and they've actually were able to get us into the budget that has yet to be approved, but the budget that's been submitted to the governor for review and approval for this coming year for stage 3 or phase 3 of our project. And so with that, I don't think I need to go into a lot of detail about how bad the lagoon is. I find that most folks that I talk to are really aware of the declining water quality. If in many cases, they're more aware of it than I am. I've been here for 5 years. I moved into the area. I was actually in West Florida for quite a while, working at the University of West Florida, and then I came here. And right away, talking with folks in the community, it became clear that the lagoon is not what it used to be. And there's so much evidence of that. We see, over the last 50 years, the high nutrients loads, increasing nutrient loads, have led to reoccurring algal blooms that you all, I imagine, have seen and experienced firsthand. We have, at this point, we're at a near complete loss for seagrasses in quite a few sections of the lagoon. And then with that, we've seen manatee and dolphin mortalities, dolphin mortality not connected directly to the seagrass loss, and fish kills as well. The little graphic up there that's straight from the recent MRC lagoon report cards, which it just highlights really how bad of a state we're in. We have a very degraded system that, as of right now, seems to only be getting worse. And so with that in mind, what we're considering, and with our partners and in consultation with counties and the states, is what of all the various options out there, what additional tools might we be able to bring to the table to help try and improve water quality? Because it's really tough shape. You can advance the slide, please. This is data, just to belabor the point about the status of the lagoon. This is data that's NASA Kennedy Space Center worked up as part of their required monitoring and maintenance and management of the natural resources under their control. They've been monitoring seagrasses, they've been monitoring manatees, that's specifically what's shown here. They also monitor lots of other natural resources within their jurisdiction. We've been working with them just in consultation on this project. They shared this data, 30 years of data on seagrasses and manatees from the Banana River specifically. And the Banana River is where we're focused for this project. And I'll tell a little bit about why that's the case coming up. But what you can see in the data is the red line represents seagrass levels changes since they started their surveys. And the blue bars represent manatee levels. The story for the seagrasses is quite obvious. They have just been declining. And then we get to a point in 2010, which was the super bloom. Was anybody in the audience here at that point and had to live through the super bloom? And yeah, it's I've heard stories about it. It was pretty intense harmful algal bloom with lots of impacts, obvious impacts, fish kills, but not so obvious was the impact on seagrasses until a little bit later. And then they saw actually an increase in seagrasses. They thought maybe a recovery of seagrasses from the harmful algal bloom, but then they see another harmful algal bloom comes through, seagrasses crash. They haven't recovered yet. 98% loss of seagrasses within the Banana River. So, and then across the story is not much different for the rest of the IRL, particularly the central and northern portions of the IRL. Manatees are a little bit different story. They saw actually increasing use of the Banana River over time for manatee foraging. That was likely because the other areas, the other basins, the other sub-basins of the IRL were degrading to a point the manatees were coming into the Banana River to find forage. But then as soon as seagrasses disappeared, the manatees themselves really have been struggling. And I'm sure you've seen some of the news. It's really tragic what's happening with the manatees. Can you please advance the slide? So with all that in mind, there are organizations across the area that have been working hard to try to improve water quality. They have all sorts of measures, whether it's at the town level, the city level, or at the county level, or at the state level, to reduce nutrients, to improve circulation, to restore habitats, to basically promote natural restoration of the system. Remove legacy nutrients. That's what muck dredging is basically going in and trying to remove nutrients that have been accumulating for 50 years in some of these locations. Causeway removal has been explored and modeled, and there's been some budget projections for what it would take to actually lift the causeway to help improve circulation. All really important approaches to trying to improve water quality. What we're wondering, if you click advance the slide, please. What we're wondering is whether enhanced ocean inflow can provide another tool to help improve water quality, and then let the system itself, give it a little breathing room, let it recover its the natural processes that manage nutrients without our intervention. But right now, as I'm going to show you some data, those processes have been impaired by just horrible water quality now going on for several decades. Advance the slide, thanks. So the idea of using enhanced ocean water exchange to improve water quality is not new. Destin Harbor has been set up a system, I think it was about 30 years ago, or 25 years ago, where they had repeated fish kills because of low dissolved oxygen in Destin Harbor. They built a system, a pump system, where they were moving water from the Gulf of Mexico into Destin Harbor, that corner of Destin Harbor, if you're familiar with that area. And with that, they saw a near instant improvements in dissolved oxygen concentrations and no fish kills since they set that up. Destin Harbor is a much smaller system than the whole IRL. So it's very, very different system, very different considerations, but a proof of concept. A similar approach has been used in other locations in the country and then also internationally. The systems vary, every one of them having their own unique considerations. The approaches to enhancing water exchange varied. In some cases, it was a hurricane blasted a hole in a barrier island, and then they just kept that open. And then they had that improved circulation through that, that new pass. The one consistent thing about all of these approaches, when we look at the data from each of these, the reports from each of these studies, we see an improvement in dissolved oxygen concentrations, and when they examined plankton loads, a reduction often in plankton loads. And that's what we're interested in. And so if you could advance the slide, please. Based on that work and based on just questions that the public has been generating for quite a while about whether a pass, a new inlets might actually help improve water quality, or whether a pumping system might be something that would work, that would be a good approach, St. Johns River Water Management District in 2007 initiated a feasibility study. They had, this is a several-year study that they contracted out to a CDM Smith to look at the feasibility of an inflow system. Where would you put it? What would the major considerations need to be? And what would be the likely cost? And what would be the design of a system like that? So they were exploring a fairly large scale system. They looked at, I think it was 32 different candidate sites throughout the IRL. They ended up selecting as what they thought would be the best site would be Port Canaveral, because of easy access to ocean water there, which definitely simplifies or reduces the cost considerably. That study was a great foundation for this, exploring the idea of using enhanced water exchange to improve the water quality in the lagoon. But that study really didn't go anywhere, in part because what they were proposing by the end of that study was a pretty big system. It was going to be quite expensive to establish, and there were going to be questions about moving large volumes of water into an area that doesn't experience that much circulation, and those the potential impacts on the habitats that still remain there. And so, and those are very appropriate questions. We have decided to, we've had the opportunity to build on that work. If you advance the slide, please. Sorry, so I'll pause for a second. There are some graphics in here that, you know, if I had my clicker, I'd be advancing through. I apologize to have to get you to go through those. Otherwise, I would have changed that if I had realized that we weren't going to be able to do that. Also, yes, I forgot to mention that the NEP, because this is a question that has come up repeatedly, can a pumping system or an inflow system of some sort, or even a pass, which lots of people have asked about, whether a new inlets would be sufficient to improve water quality. It comes up, it's come up regularly, and based on the success of projects elsewhere and based on the feasibility study that St. John's initiated, the NEP in their CCMP, that the approved CCMP, has indicated that they think, or they support development of a pilot project to just test this concept. So will it perform the way that we expect, or that we intuitively think it would, the enhanced inflow would? If you could fast forward, click the slide, please. So that's that. Then you come to the Florida Institute of Technology, where Representative Altman reached out and asked if we would be interested in following up on St. John's work and further exploring whether an inflow system could provide a meaningful impact on lagoon water quality without potential negative impacts. And so we've initiated a large multidisciplinary project. This is kind of an overview of the different considerations that's we're examining for this project. We have a team working on the hydrology, so looking at modeling the lagoon, modeling circulation, and looking at how that changes with different potential inflow scenarios. We have another team working on the geochemistry, which, come to find out, that is a huge component of these sorts of projects, and we're learning a lot about the geochemistry of the lagoon, the nutrient cycling, and the role of water quality in the nutrient cycling itself. And we have a separate group of folks, myself included, that are just helping to gather some baseline data, improved understanding of the habitats and the species that occur, particularly right now we're focusing on the Banana River, so that then we can track impacts, potential changes in those communities and those habitats with a demonstration system, and sets up the foundation also for future monitoring of changes in those communities if at some point in the future a full-scale system was constructed. And then we also have some folks working on the engineering of both a demonstration project and a potential design for a full-scale system if there is interest and justification in one at some point down the road. So that gets us to here, the pilot study. We have decided after reviewing our data that a pilot study is really an important part of this. We have to test our predictions, and we need to move water to test our predictions. If you could advance the slide, please. Thank you. So this is a multi-phase project. Phases 1 and 2 are complete. Phase 1, each phase 1 and 2 are each a year long based on the funding cycles that the state provides us. We focused on exploring a bunch of candidate sites, a subset of the sites that St. John's looked at as a potential site for a demonstration project. We initiated the predictive modeling, the predictive hydrology, and then we started our baseline data collection. Year 2, we built on that effort considerably. So year 2, the modeling advanced. We moved into calibration and tuning of the hydrodynamic model or hydrologic model, which now includes an ability to actually model plankton communities themselves and how they're responding to these changes in circulation and changes in nutrient loads. And then we've continued baseline data collection, and we're at 60% design on the demonstration pumping system that we've built. Phase 3, or that we proposed. Phase 3 is going to be focused, if funded, it's not funded right now, is going to be focused on pilot permitting and construction and initiation of the demonstration project. And then with that, we'll have continuation of the modeling, continuation of baseline data collection, and assessment of impacts. Forward, please. And so I'm going to start, the next few slides are going to emphasize where we're at right now, the findings from our first 2 years. What did we find? We have some really interesting work that we've been doing, and let's see if this, oh, no, you're welcome to go forward. I think if you scroll over this, there should be an ability to, or if you click it, actually, it should start, there should be an animation that initiates. Or if you just advance one, will it initiate? Oh, there we go. So yeah, and then do that on the other one too. Thanks. So what it's not activating. Well, what we have here is just, I wanted to give you an example of some of the modeling effort that we've been doing, which is taking, with our focus now on the Banana River and the Central IRL based on our year 1 findings, the model itself is looking at baseline nutrient loads and then what happens when you start moving water. And in this case, we were moving water into the Central Banana River. And you would see, if the animation was working, what you would see is that actually relative to existing conditions, moving water in, as we would intuitively expect, decreases nutrient loads. We have a particle that is a virtual nutrient that we can track through the modeling. And what you would see actually after a year of running this model, so after years of the virtual time, you see that the nutrient loads within this area of the Banana River reduce considerably. And so we've expanded. So that's just a visual representation of one run of the model. We've been digging into that data to understand what's actually happening to the nutrients and also exploring what's happens under different scenarios. You can see up top there, 10 cubic meters per second. I imagine that's not an intuitive volume of water to understand. I'll tell you, that's a lot of water. You're moving at 10 cubic meters per second, you're moving a lot of water. We're able, with that amount of water, you're able to alter the nutrient loads across the whole Banana River as far as the modeling is indicating. That would be something comparable to what a full system might look like, potential full system. Parts per thousand. So these are virtual tracers that mimic nutrients. Yeah. And I'm sorry that the animation is not working, but it's just I put that up to show just one little component of the modeling that we've been doing and the type of outputs we get.
So in this model, the water is moving from where to where?
The water is moving in this model. The inputs was actually going to be actually, I think in this model, he used Port Canaveral. So the input is from Port Canaveral into the central Banana River here. And then, so this would be the baseline with no inflow. And then you would have, if the animation was working, you would have seen it advance for a year. And there's changes in nutrient concentrations, but no. So this system, as it's being proposed right now, would be unidirectional. That doesn't mean that ultimately a full system wouldn't be. There's options for bidirectional exchange, but bidirectional exchange is probably not what we want, because that ends up confining the impact to one smaller area. Rather, is if we can force the inflow into one area, then we take advantage of natural circulations to move that water. In this case, well, actually it depends on the season. Sometimes it moves north and circulates up north in the Banana River, but then most of the rest of the time it's actually flowing south and then out into the central Banana River. And that's going to get to an interesting point that I want to talk about with some of the data that we found, some of the results we found in year 2. Yes.
This is 10 cubic meter inflow.
Yes.
Theoretically full scale.
That is on par with several full-scale volumes that we've been looking at. Yes.
Your graphics show what would happen after a 12-month operation.
Yes.
Does that consider a current baseline nutrient?
Yes.
Inload, whatever the current nutrient, we're still placing the nutrients in. Is it steady state nutrient? Continuous loading?
No. So that's getting into a really interesting question about the models. So the modeling, and I really appreciate you bringing that up. The hydrodynamic models, which now have the ability to also predict nutrient dynamics and plankton concentrations, they will they include what we call boundary conditions. And so there is inputs in that model. There's actually input from runoff from the land. There's input from rivers. There's actually input from tidal input from Sebastian inlets. So their nutrients are continuing to be added under this model scenario. Yes.
I guess I was trying to get to the point that going forward, in your model, are you assuming that nutrient input is going down, or is it steady state?
The model would be projecting based on the parameters for those inputs, and so picture Turkey Creek. There will be one grid in the model that represents the inputs from Turkey Creek, and that's would be projected when it projects forward in time. It's taking an average of the inputs under different conditions, because Turkey Creek inputs are going to change as well with rainfall and with seasons. That is moved forward in time and estimated based on the other conditions that are predicted to change as well over that period. So it's not set, but it hasn't been tuned to a point that says, well, okay, so if 10 years from now, we're able to reduce nutrient loads by X amount through other measures, what would happen here? It's not integrated at that level. It's basically taking kind of our current conditions now. Yeah, I wouldn't say steady state, but current conditions now. Yeah.
Over the course of the year, the average, like seasonal. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, because we're working, so we're using the last, in this model, there's actually the last 10 years of data, the actual observational data is used to calibrate the model. And then that's projected forward from there with its variability and the interaction of these different parameters. But the effect of other management interventions is not yet included in that model. And it's a really good point. And it's actually an approach that we can potentially look at down the road is what happens with inflow plus these other management actions that are underway in some cases.
It should work in your favor.
It would, yes. What we're expecting is that it's kind of the sum of all of these projects that is going to end up hopefully someday solving the problem of water quality. There's no one silver bullet. And so it's not going to be muck removal alone. It's not going to be inflow alone that's going to solve the problem. We're all going to complement each other, potentially inflow as part of the solution, but maybe not. I mean, we're still at a very preliminary phase in this project.
This hydraulic model has boundaries on it.
Yes.
And you can follow the virtual nutrient molecule throughout the course of the year. You said sometimes the inflow forces the virtual molecule north, sometimes it forces it
Yes.
south.
Yeah.
Does it create a problem to the north and south areas because you're moving
I'll-
some stuff?
I'll get to that. So this is where it gets really neat. You're getting to a really interesting question and a really important question. So here, can you go forward, please? All right, so key findings from hydrology and eutrophication. When we model out, so now we're actually working with a model that's been run for 3 years. This would have been a kind of an end of year 2 output for our modeling efforts. And again, you can see we're focusing on Banana River and the central IRL. And it's hard, I'm sure it's really hard to see the differences, but we see under different inflow scenarios, potential inflow scenarios, we see improved dissolved oxygen concentrations throughout the Banana River. And these are just 2 examples of inflow scenarios, C and D. I don't remember off the top of my head the exact volumes of those scenarios, but consistent amongst all the scenarios is we see improved dissolved oxygen concentrations. And that turns out to be really important. It's not just important for the fish and the everything else that lives in the lagoon. It's important for nutrient cycling itself, or just the nutrient processing. And I'm going to get into that in a second. Go forward, please. We also see with the dissolved oxygen concentration improving, we see a reduction in nitrogen and phosphorus across the Banana River. You'll notice that there isn't much of a change. You start seeing some change here. These figures are a little bit different than the prior slide I showed in that these are actually the differences from the baseline. Basically, it's like if you went back to that prior slide and took the baseline and subtracted it from the modeled run, and then the difference is what we're projecting here. So what we're projecting here is changes in nitrogen and phosphorus. So we go improvements in DO, we see reductions in nitrogen and phosphorus, and then we see changes in chlorophyll concentrations within the Banana River, but not elsewhere. So the model takes into account what's happening outside in the central IRL. The model goes down south of Sebastian Inlet and takes into account, it can estimate what's happening at Sebastian Inlet. So are we, like you were pointing out, if we're moving a whole bunch of water in the Banana River, are we just simply moving nutrients into another compartment that's just going to push the problem into somebody else's backyard? That is not, right now the modeling suggests that that is not the case. And I'll be honest, we were all a bit surprised that we did not see a significant change in nutrient concentrations at the inlets. And these again are just different inflow scenarios. The reason we're not seeing a change, this is where we're at right now, is our hypothesis is that we're not seeing a change at the inlets because the dissolved oxygen is really promoting actual nutrients removal from the system. And that's the geochemist, our geochemist, Dr. Austin Fox, has been doing a lot of work to help us better understand how nutrients, the evolution of nutrients in the lagoon under different temperatures and different dissolved oxygen concentrations. If you could go forward, please. You can click it again. And so now I want to highlight Dr. Fox's really amazing work. And again, these images are quite difficult to parse out, especially with the resolution we have here. But I'll kind of walk you quickly through them. Dr. Fox, given his experience, he knew that water quality on the surface of the lagoon might be okay, but water quality down at the sediment level, at that interface where the sediment and the water interface, it could be horrible. And it's often horrible. From his own personal observations, he knew that. So he went out and he deployed a whole bunch of oxygen sensors right down there at the sediment interface, places where no one is really tracking oxygen levels. And partly because there's only so much time and so much equipment that you can deploy in the lagoon. And so the St. John's and Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute made the reasonable decision to take their sensors that are really expensive and put them mid-water in select key places. Mid-water is the mid-water sensors for, I don't remember whose sensor this particular is being depicted here, but the mid-water sensors are shown in blue for dissolved oxygen concentration. And what you can see here is this is the actual point where we get into hypoxia, where there's so little oxygen in the water that animals either flee or they die. Mid-water over this period here, the sensors show that the water seemed to be fine. There was no hypoxia based on those sensors. Dr. Fox's sensor, which was co-located with this other sensor, but sitting right down there at the sediment interface, showed that that sediment and the water just above it were regularly going hypoxic. So the fish, if you're a fish and you're up above in, swimming in the water column, you're fine, there's enough oxygen. If you're a benthic species of any sort, you, over this short period of time, regularly experienced hypoxia. And some of these species are very capable of handling a moment, an evening, an evening of hypoxia, but repeated exposure to hypoxia, extended hypoxia is one of the reasons we're in this place that we're in now as far as fish kills and as far as an inability to process nutrients. And if you could go forward, I'll show you what I mean by that. Again, a lot of information depicted here. The summary of this data that Dr. Fox collected, basically what he is showing is that as the dissolved oxygen concentrations in the sediment drops, and when it goes below, when the sediment goes hypoxic, the sediment microbes themselves, that community changes. And then all of a sudden, the only organisms that are living there and thriving are ones that survive fine without oxygen. Well, those microbes consume and use nutrients in a different way than the microbes that actually do well when there's oxygen. And they end up actually releasing nutrients when the system, when the sediment goes low. A similar process happens to phosphate. So that was nitrogen specifically, the dynamic for nitrogen, because it's a microbial process. You're actually digesting, the microbes are digesting the nitrogen, they're consuming it. Ideally, they're removing it from the system. When you have microbes that are typically anoxic, they prefer or hypoxic environments, what happens is you end up with muck accumulating. It's similar to, I don't know if any of you are up in New England or anywhere where there's there's marshes and long, big tidal exchanges. You know how when the tide goes out and it smells like sulfur? Those marshes are anoxic down in the sediments. And it's a community of microbes down there that survive well, but they process nutrients differently. They actually release nutrients into the water. They provide fertilizer essentially for plankton. Phosphates, different process, but the same results. Phosphate actually is removed from the system by binding to the sediments. When the sediment goes into low dissolved oxygen concentrations, that phosphate actually releases from the sediments. And Dr. Fox saw that when he recorded these individual hypoxic events, he would see a spike in phosphorus shortly after that at his study area. So he was showing that every time the sediment goes hypoxic, it's not doing its job of removing nutrients. It's actually releasing nutrients into the water and fertilizing the plankton. And so if you could go forward a bit.
Is that the basis for muck removal? Is that the science behind muck removal?
It's part of it, because so the muck it's kind of it's all an interconnected system, and there's negative feedbacks that come from the muck. So the muck is accumulating because there's so much of it, that's so many nutrients are coming in, and then they're being consumed naturally by organisms in the water column and in the sediments. Those organisms depletes, they use oxygen. They're like us. I mean, we're using oxygen constantly as to metabolize food. They're using oxygen to metabolize the nutrients that are coming in. And then when they deplete the oxygen, the community shifts, then they end up with an accumulation of those nutrients, which is the muck. So you end up with these low oxygen environments around the muck and in the muck. Muck is basically anoxic. There's no oxygen in there whatsoever. And so that accumulates, and then it's regularly releasing nutrients into the overlying water. It's basically continuing to fertilize the water. So if you remove muck, what you do is you improve the oxygen, you increase the area of sediment that's likely to get oxygen, be oxygenated, hopefully, and you're removing that source of fertilizer that's just sitting on the bottom. It does. So they call it, it's a nutrient flux, and it's under different conditions, it releases more or less likely in the winter than in the summer, but it definitely happens. And it's one of Dr. Fox's projects that he's worked on for quite a while now, is mapping muck throughout the lagoon and figuring out which areas should be prioritized for muck removal, because there's some areas that are particularly bad compared to other areas. Not all muck is the same, apparently, as Dr. Fox likes to say. So one thing that we've seen, what's real, like just to summarize this a lot of data that goes into these findings, is that when we did the modeling, we were surprised by the outcome. We weren't surprised to see the improvements in dissolved oxygen and the reduction in nutrients, but we were surprised at how significant a change we saw in nutrient concentrations, and in turn, how significant a change we saw in algal concentrations. This helps us understand why we saw that change, because the model is actually taking into account those biogeochemical processes as best as it can. The model is recognizing that as the dissolved oxygen concentration improves, you get better sequestration and then removal of the nutrients. And that's what this data here is showing. It's showing us why we got the model results that we did. And then this data is now being used to further calibrate the model to improve it so that we can get better predictions from it. Nutrient ratios also have been shown to change in a favorable way with inflow, based again on these field and lab experiments and the modeling. These are all predictions. They are not set in stone. This is exactly what's going to happen. There are a lot of unknowns about this system that we actually have to test. That's why we get to a point where we're saying we need a demonstration project. We need to move water and see what happens and see if our assumptions hold up. Can you forward the slide, please? So just as I want to highlight that it's not all about just nutrients and algae. We recognize that this is a complex system with lots of species that we need to take into account how changing the system might affect them, and whether ideally it's going to affect them in a positive way, or whether there's a potential of a negative impact. Here we have results of the modeling efforts where we're taking 30 years of data from the state's Fisheries Independent Monitoring Program, where they've been sampling. They're out 4 or 5 days a week, sampling in the lagoon, staining for fish. They keep track of where fish are and under what conditions they occur in different areas. That gets fed into a model that predicts what's going to happen to fish abundance under these different inflow scenarios. And what we saw is that there is a clear positive relationship between water quality and fish abundance for 7 species of interest that have been looked at so far. And so as water quality improves, we see an increase in abundance in the majority of these species. As water quality has been declining over the last 50 years, we've seen a decrease in abundance in these fishes. And if we could go forward, please. Yes.
What is the rationale for the water flow at 5 cubic meters versus 10 cubic meters of your study? There's some symbolism there. It's only half the flow rate.
Well, so we've run, the model has been run at a bunch of different scenarios, potential future inflow rates. The 5 cubic meter per second inflow rates that's a potential for a full system as well. I think Dr. Zarillo, who did the modeling, he looked at, I think it was 5 cubic meters, 10, 20, and I think he ran one run even at 30 cubic meters per second. The 5 cubic meters was the most robust run. This seems to be, this was the volume that St. John's was initially proposing for a system. And it's the run that we were initially, the volume we were initially emphasizing. And then that model output is then was provided to the fish team. This same work could be done with any of the model outputs in order to better understand impacts. And based on what we saw with these results, and I'm speculating right now, but what we saw at 5 cubic meters, the relationship between water quality and fish abundance, and we've seen with the other runs, the higher volume runs, improvements in water quality, it should actually only work out more favorable for the fishes. But again, predictions that we need to test. We've been looking at a variety of different ways of assessing fish, not just relying on the FIM data, because it's a subset of species that you can actually catch in a seine. It's not all species. We also used an environmental DNA approach where we were actually detecting DNA from these fishes in the water, and then looking at community diversity from Sebastian Inlets to Northern Banana River. In a variety of metrics, you see a reduction in fish diversity as you see increase or declining water quality. Can you advance the slide, please? There we go. And then also we have some baseline data on seagrasses, benthic invertebrates, and the plankton community as well. The plankton community is a huge part of this project. It's really the focus of this project. And so we have baseline data on the plankton community, which we'll be continuing to collect and analyze if we have the opportunity to continue the project. Could you advance the slide, please? And so with that, after our first 2 years of this project, we're at a point where the models and the field and lab work for the geochemistry all are pointing towards benefits of inflow. Improved dissolved oxygen concentrations, reduced nutrient loads, without just simply dispersing those nutrients to other locations, digesting them basically on site in the Banana River. But these are predictions we need to test, because the model is robust and increasingly getting better. It's an iterative approach. But we can't guarantee that we've covered all of the potential parameters. And so we're proposing a demonstration project set up at Port Canaveral, where we're moving water from Port Canaveral into the Banana River at actually a relatively small volume, to be able to just simply give us allow us the opportunity to test these predictions. If you go forward, please. And so here we have our proposed site for the demonstration project right up at Port Canaveral. We have a site down south that we've identified as a reference site that would be unimpacted by the flow that we're proposing. Here you can see the differences in change in salinity under different inflow regimes, 5 cubic meters per second and then 0.5 cubic meters per second. Again, 5 cubic meters per second was the volume that St. John's in their study had looked at for potential projects. You can see that there are changes in salinity across a reasonably large area, but they are relatively small, 2-3 parts per thousand changes. What we've done, because we recognize that getting a permit for a demonstration project that is going to potentially affect a large portion of the Banana River would be really challenging. And that's one of the issues that St. John's ran into. What we've done is we figured out how to confine the flow in Lagoon. Actually, I'll show a picture. I think I got a picture coming up. in a region just south, a little bay just south of the locks, so after the Canaveral locks. And by confining it, we can actually ramp down the volume of flow that we would need to move, the volume of water we would need to move, in order to then still see the effect that we want to see. We need to test whether we're going to see that change in dissolved oxygen like we expect. And then also in relation to that, whether we're going to see the change in the microbial community and the change in nutrient cycling that right now we predict we will see. And so we were able to actually, with our current design for the demonstration project, 0.5 cubic meters per second with a very small area of impact. If you could go forward, please. And so here is the Port Canaveral locks shown just here. This is Avocet Lagoon just off to the left. This is the bay where boats go to die. I'm sure you're familiar with it. You've seen it. We have proposed in consultation with the port and with Army Corps of Engineers to actually move water from the locks or just outside of the locks across Army Corps lands into the corner of this little bay here. And then this is the actual route that we've proposed for this demonstration project. Again, pretty small scale, 0.5 cubic meters per second, moving water from the locks into this corner. But because this area is somewhat constricted, we will see a gradient in change in water quality, or we expect to see a gradient in change of water quality from here in the inside edge of this little cove, going all the way out. That'll allow us to track and actually validate our predictions as far as changes in temperature, changes in salinity, changes in dissolved oxygen, and then changes in nutrient concentration. At the same time, we'll have folks out there monitoring the plankton community, looking for changes in the plankton community that we would expect. It should shift towards a more marine plankton community, which actually would be a beneficial change. Turbidity or the clarity of the water should improve along a gradient. And so with that, if we're able to get to a point where we're actually funded to set up this demonstration project, then we get to test these predictions. We run this system for a year, and then we break it down. We summarize our results. We determine whether we were able to validate our results, and if not, why, what was different than we expected. And we provide those results, the findings from this study, for stakeholders, for legislatures, for resource managers, so that we all can decide whether this is a tool that we want to use to improve water quality, or perhaps our money and time is put better towards other tools to improve water quality. If you could go forward, please. So one of the things, by reducing down to 0.5 cubic meters per second, we also were able to significantly reduce the project cost and the potential negative impacts, as I had mentioned previously. And then we will be supporting direct testing and validation of the inflow predictions. Because I emphasize that for a reason. We're at a point where we feel really good about the idea, but these are all just predictions that we need to test. We're not ready to say, let's go for it. This is the way to help improve water quality. And then with that, we have 2 years worth of reports, executive summaries and full reports available online if anybody wants to see those, so the first 2 years of reports. We also have a frequently asked questions kind of handout up there that addresses many of the points I brought up today. Or you're welcome to reach out to myself or Rob Salen, who's in the back there, who's works with Florida Tech and helps coordinate our interaction with government agencies. And I really do want to thank everybody who's helped out. We've gotten so much advice on this project. We've been reaching out for advice. This is a big project with lots of questions. It's not rocket science, it's harder. There's so many unknowns. And and we know so little about many of those parts. And we have been leaning on a lot of folks in the community to help tune the project, make sure that we're asking the right questions and make sure we're using the right approaches, and make sure that when we're done, we're able to provide them with the data that they need, the resource managers in particular, the legislators, in order to be able to really provide a kind of realistic evaluation of this approach. rather than, just going off of our intuition. Oh, of course it's going to be good. Yeah, we're not sure. It looks good right now, but we need to test this. And so with that, I really do appreciate you all taking the time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Before you take the questions, if there are questions here in the room, I'll have to repeat them so people online can hear what the question.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry that we had a bunch of questions that we weren't repeating, but yes.
From a cost and a logistics standpoint, it seems to me that the way that you've approached it makes sense. You have by your model, you have a 10 cubic meter inflow and it's located in one location.
Mm-hmm.
So cost and logistics, that seems to make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
But if you remove those two factors, cost and logistics, is there any hydraulic benefit in not having one source inflow, but breaking that volume down to smaller pieces and placing it up and down the Banana River, say in 5 locations, not one, but each location would only be 1/5 or some other fraction? It would probably cost more, it would be harder to operate, but does it give any hydraulic benefit?
Yeah, so if we ignore costs and the permitting considerations and all of that, I understand. So
It's just a hypothetical question.
what I would say is that based on the modeling that I've seen with a single system, a single full operational system, full scale system, we can improve water quality across the Banana River. That basically the Banana River is, more or less kind of 3 different compartments. We can improve water quality across that area, which means that I don't think we would gain much by distributing that effort into a bunch of different small areas. But your point, you have the right idea there in that with this one pump, we have a limited area that we'd be able to impact. And the modeling actually shows that, and that was what I was highlighting in that we don't see a significant change outside of the Banana River. Part of it is because of the circulation patterns of the Banana River. One of our results that I didn't highlight here is that we show that in the fall, as the lagoon levels rise, which you all have maybe noticed that's actually tied to relaxation of the Gulf Stream offshore, and the water backs up offshore, and then it raises the water level of the whole lagoon every fall. So really, really remarkable connection between offshore processes and inshore processes. Well, when that happens, the circulation in Banana River starts flowing northwards. And so we have a month or 2 months where there's actually a predominant flow northwards in the Banana River. And that's partly why we may be confining the effects of the Banana River, but there's only so big of an area that you can alter with a system like this. So your idea of distributed system, maybe down the road, if this idea pans out, if it proves to be a reasonable way of addressing water quality and then is actually cost effective potentially compared to other approaches, well, maybe there would be opportunities for other areas. Yeah.
I would just hedge a guess that if there was one source for the inflow, that the further you get away from that source, you're going to have a gradient,
Mm-hmm.
and the impact will get less and less and less the further away you go from the point source.
Yes, but
There's a gradient. If you disperse that flow into
Yeah.
multiple locations, I'm just going to guess that the gradient wouldn't be as pronounced because you're flushing water in multiple locations. So that gradient is not going to be as pronounced because it's being introduced in other spots. If it's a point source, there's a gradient.
yeah, I'm gonna guess, because I'm not the modeler, that you're right. Yeah. But we discounted cost and logistics, which we can't.
You can't.
Yeah.
I'm assuming what you're saying is going to be a pump system.
Yeah.
Not going to be tidal.
Yes. Yeah, though as far as a full-scale system, it could be tidally driven. It could be a weir system that actually takes advantage of the high tidal exchange, but is still unidirectional. So that is definitely for consideration.
20 years ago, there was a project that the port was promoting. Basically, it's going to be some sort of a weir structure that would go into Avocet, and then there is an existing culvert that connects Avocet.
Yeah. Huh. I haven't heard that.
Yeah.
That would be really interesting to.
This is back in either late 90s or early 2000s.
Well, we'll ask around and see if we can stir up some of that.
The Port Authority now.
Yeah.
That was going on, but Charles Lee was Audubon was
Uh-huh.
involved with it. I know we went over and did an inspection.
Well, and that was just actually, it wasn't a weir system, but one of the systems that St. John's looked at was culverts that would more or less do the same thing. Yeah.
And another thing, what's your 10 cubic meters per second per minute, what's that compute to in gallons?
Oh, goodness. I do not know. You know what? I've done the math and I just don't remember it. I would have to do it again.
It might be 5,000 gallons a minute, which is enormous.
It's a lot of water. Yeah. I need to do that and remember that for these talks.
Well, the
Yeah.
reason I'm asking that was that in somewhere around 2005, there was legislative money that came down, looking at putting an RO plant, power plant,
Mhm.
that was going to suck out lagoon water, do RO on it, ship that to the land.
Right.
Which kind of causes demise, but in any case.
Right.
But the modeling that was done then, when they were withdrawing, I think it was 1 million gallons a day.
Yeah.
The salinity went up. It drove the salinity all the way from Sebastian up to somewhere around 10, 15 parts, which is pretty different.
That's quite high. So that's different than what our models are projecting for change in the Banana River based on the inflow system. Yeah. Yeah, so you saw that. I think that was 10 cubic meters per second, or no, that was 5 cubic meters per second, and there was a couple parts per thousand change through about half the Banana River. We need to we have to keep that in mind. I mean, a change of that magnitude, a couple parts per thousand, the lagoon changes, the Banana River in particular changes much more than that regularly, but that doesn't mean that we can't have an adverse impact by if we change kind of the baseline. And that's that's one of the things that the fish model is doing, is trying to take that into account, is how would that change in salinity potentially impact reproduction, spawning. We need to know that. I mean, we don't want to hurt what's still there, but we also have to recognize it is a highly impacted system. It's hard to picture it getting much more degraded. So we're at a point where we really need to, well, then knock on wood, quick. It's hard for us to, I think what we have to do is we have to consider all these options. Yeah.
And then there's the other side of this, somewhere back about mid-90s, somewhere, there was a lady who was offering a shellfish lease on Pine Island in the Indian River, who convinced the Corps of Engineers to open the locks right away. And they found that the salinity, they were taking salinity, I think, right at 528. And they found virtually no change when they opened the locks, left them open on high tide, essentially.
Yeah. That's so. I've heard of one situation where the locks were stuck open and provide kind of an opportunistic impact.
What caused that program to end was that apparently there was a fair amount of sand that moved through the shoal with the locks.
Yes.
So one of the ships for the spaceship, the shuttle, was stuck in.
Oh my goodness, stuck in the locks. Yeah. That might be why the Army Corps is not interested in discussing opening the locks at this point, because of that past experience. Yeah. But I'll tell you, they have been very supportive of the idea of a demonstration project to just prove of concept. Does it work or not? They're offering right so far in discussions. We haven't gone through full permitting, but in discussions, they're comfortable with the design. They're comfortable with the approach. They've offered some modifications, but not much. And it would be the idea though is that no impact on their infrastructure really whatsoever. Allow them to completely continue with their mission there. Yes.
So your phase 3 is pending.
Yes.
What's it pending?
Well, we're in the budget just recently. As of a week ago, we got into this year's budget, but now the budget's been submitted to the governor, and we'll see whether the governor decides to approve the budgets or whether we end up getting vetoed out.
So it's fair.
Yes. Yeah. And the idea is that would provide us the support we need to actually initiate the permitting, and then assuming that we can move through permitting in a reasonable time, which we've done a lot of groundwork to kind of help us through that process. Then we would actually initiate bidding for the construction of the demonstration project and ideally initiation of that project shortly after that. And then the pump would run for a year and we would collect our data. And then right now it's the idea is that it would be temporary. We'd break it down and we'd summarize the results for everybody. Yes.
If the pilot plant is a pumping situation, does that preclude the weir or other devices on a full scale? Does it kind of shift the equation toward a permanent pumping station, or is it just the amount of volume it's delivering and not the delivery system?
It's the volume specifically, but there is some consideration of how that water moves into the lagoon that we'll have to take into account in the models, because we're right now going back and forth with engineers and hydrologists to try to understand whether do you want to move it in a turbulent way and mix up the water, and so you're just right away are mixing good water, relatively good water, with Banana River water, or do you actually want to kind of have a sheet flow where the good water moves along the bottom, and it would be higher salinity and it would be lower temperature, so it actually would be more likely to stay on the bottom, and that's where we might actually see a restoration of that sediment nutrient cycling. And so would we have a bigger effect that way? And so we'll be somewhat constrained with the demonstration project on how we can manage the flow, but we will be tracking the movement of that water in a 3D perspective, out from that area, but then, also up and down in the water column. And we'll be looking for whether we get what they call basically kind of a wedge, a salinity wedge that moves along the bottom. And if we do, how long does that stay oxygenated enough to provide a meaningful benefits? And it's not, I want to highlight, the goal isn't to turn on a pump and improve the water quality in the Banana River like that. What we want to do is move DO, the dissolved oxygen concentration, just above the threshold. We want to basically stabilize it so that we don't get those hypoxic events, so that then the nutrients, the microbial community within the sediments can persist, can be restored, and do its job of digesting nutrients all on their own without any additional effects. So it's the idea is that we're aiming to try to just provide a boost to the natural processes that have historically managed nutrients in the lagoon and are now just out of whack.
Pumping system may allow you to do some additional aeration too.
Could, yes.
I mean, you could put aerators and piping systems that may allow you to move water, but also maybe you can increase the oxygen content of that.
It might be, that's something to consider, because although the water we've been moving from Port Canaveral is more or less 100% saturated, but maybe we could super saturate it. That's an idea. If Dr. Fox was here, he would have some thoughts on that, because he's actually looked at bubblers and different size bubbles to try to improve DO in canals. And so he would.
The piping system's under pressure. So
Yes.
you can pull it back.
Yeah.
You can pull it back and maybe you can aerate what's actually in that pipe.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, I'm willing to bet that Dr. Fox would have some ideas on that just based on his prior work. A little bit outside of my area of expertise, though.
Questions online.
Yes.
Someone's asking if you are only introducing water, is there any concern about rising water leading to flooding in lower lying areas and canals and homes?
That's a really good question. And so part of the model actually estimates water level. It predicts water level. And what we've seen that even in a proposed full system, we've seen a couple centimeter change in water level in the Banana River, which is far less than we see on an annual level change. But that said, we also, if it was a full system, well, whether it's a demonstration system or a full system at some points, the idea would be that you could turn it off if you needed to. If there was a storm coming, you could turn it off. If there was maybe seasonal high water level times where we don't want to exacerbate any flooding risk, we could potentially turn it off. So we would build in some ability to manage that potential risk.
And then the second question is related to pumping water in from the Port Canaveral area, and would that cause any additional pollutants to be entered into the lagoon, such as like oil or grease, things like that?
Yeah, so that definitely presents a risk. And luckily the ports and Army Corps of Engineers have an emergency management plan in place because the that area, the port is already connected to the Banana River through the locks. And so they have an emergency management plan that if there's a spill, they have the locks, they'll close the locks. And we would be aligning our plan with their plan, so that if there is an issue in the port, we could remotely shut off the pump and keep from spreading any pollutants that end up in keep them from dispersing into the Banana River. But that's a really good question. Thank you. Well, I really appreciate you coming. It was nice to have such a small group and give you guys a chance to ask any questions that you have. And wish us luck. Yeah, we do too. Yeah, it's fascinating. All right, so as we move into the fall and up north starts cooling down, what the Gulf Stream actually relaxes. And as the Gulf Stream slows down,